What happens when a late-night laugh turns into a live television standoff that no one saw coming? Before we dive into this explosive story, make sure you hit subscribe to Talk Flair right now, like this video, and drop a comment, because moments like this, they don't just trend, they shake Hollywood. The studio lights inside The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon shimmered off polished wood floors as the house band played a jazzy intro. The audience clapped in rhythm, expecting another lighthearted, meme-worthy segment. Sitting center stage, glowing under the spotlight, was Kim Kardashian, fashion icon, entrepreneur, reality star turned serious actress. Across from her, flashing his trademark grin, was Jimmy Fallon, the king of playful interviews and viral games. At first, everything felt perfectly scripted. Jimmy leaned back in his chair. "Kim, you've done it all. Beauty mogul, law student, producer, now actress again. You're unstoppable." The crowd cheered. Kim smiled, poised. "I just like to challenge myself." Jimmy nodded enthusiastically. "And people love that. I mean, your role in American Horror Story had everyone talking." Applause. But then Jimmy's tone shifted, subtly, almost playfully. "Some critics," he added with a half-laugh, "say you're everywhere because you're famous, not famous because you're talented. What do you say to that?" The audience let out a collective, "Oh." Kim's smile didn't vanish, but it changed. It tightened. "Are we doing jokes?" she asked calmly. "Or are we having a real conversation?" Jimmy blinked, surprised. "Oh, no, I mean, it's just something people say online." Kim crossed her legs, straightened her back. "People say a lot online." The laughter faded. There it was, that shift. That invisible line between banter and challenge. Kim's voice remained even, but her eyes sharpened. "For years, I've worked behind the scenes. I've built companies. I've studied law. I've worked on criminal justice reform cases that helped free people from prison. But somehow, it always comes back to that narrative." Jimmy tried to soften the mood. "Hey, I think you've proven yourself." "Then why repeat it?" Kim replied. Gasps. The band went quiet. Jimmy adjusted his cue cards, suddenly unsure. "Well, I think people are curious." "Curiosity is different from dismissiveness," Kim interrupted gently but firmly. The tension wasn't explosive yet, but it was simmering. The camera cut to audience members exchanging glances. No one expected this. They expected games. Lip-sync battles. Harmless laughter. Not a confrontation about legacy. Jimmy attempted a pivot. "Let's talk about your new project. You're producing and starring in The Fifth Wheel." "That's huge." Kim exhaled slowly, regaining composure. "It is huge. And I worked really hard to make it happen. I wasn't handed that." The words hung heavy in the air. Jimmy chuckled nervously. "Well, you do have a pretty powerful brand." Kim tilted her head. "Brand doesn't replace effort." The audience clapped, hesitantly at first, then louder. Something had cracked open. As the segment continued, Jimmy tried to steer it back into friendly waters, but Kim wasn't playing along anymore. She wasn't there to be the punchline. She was there to redefine the narrative. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I've had special moments in my life that didn't involve cameras. Becoming a mother, passing my law exams, working with families who thought they'd never see justice. Those moments matter more than ratings." Silence. Jimmy's smile faded into something more serious. "Do you feel misunderstood?" Kim paused. "Constantly." The room felt smaller now. Intimate. Charged. She spoke about the early days, about being reduced to headlines, about fighting to be taken seriously in rooms full of executives who saw her as a marketing tool rather than a creative force. "And now?" Jimmy asked quietly. "Now I'm done apologizing for evolving." Applause erupted. But Jimmy, perhaps sensing the gravity slipping from his control, tried one last joke. "So no more reality TV drama?" Kim's eyes flashed. "Drama doesn't define me." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't explosive. But it hit harder than any scream. The audience gasped again. By the time they returned from commercial break, social media was already buzzing. Clips were being uploaded in real time. Hashtags formed within minutes. Jimmy opened with a measured tone this time. "Kim, you've had a remarkable journey. From keeping up with the Kardashians to becoming a serious presence in Hollywood. That's not easy." Kim nodded, but there was still fire in her voice. "It's not. And sometimes I think people don't want to see growth. They want to keep you in the box they discovered you in." Jimmy leaned forward. "Do you think Hollywood respects you?" Kim hesitated. "I think Hollywood respects numbers," she replied carefully. "Respect for craft? That's something I'm still earning. And I'm okay with that." But don't pretend I haven't worked for it. The crowd roared in agreement. She began reflecting on filming intense scenes for American Horror Story, how she trained, rehearsed, and pushed herself emotionally. I knew people were waiting for me to fail, she admitted. And that pressure? It fuels you. Jimmy nodded slowly, visibly more grounded now. You've also taken on producing roles. That's power. It's control, Kim corrected. If I don't tell my story, someone else will. And they won't tell it right. The tension had transformed from confrontation to revelation. But the moment that truly stunned the audience came near the end. Jimmy asked, almost cautiously, "Do you think you'd be where you are without controversy?" The air froze. Kim stared at him, steady, unblinking. Controversy built attention, she said finally. But discipline built longevity. A standing ovation began in the front row. Jimmy swallowed, nodding. Fair. The interview ended with polite smiles, but something irreversible had happened. This wasn't just another late-night segment. It was a collision between old perceptions and a new self-defined identity. And when the cameras cut off, producers rushed onto the stage. Jimmy removed his earpiece, exhaling heavily. Kim stood tall, composed, but you could see the adrenaline in her eyes. Outside the studio, fans debated whether Jimmy had crossed a line or simply asked tough questions. Some praised Kim's composure. Others accused the show of trying to bait her. Entertainment blogs ran headlines within hours. Commentators dissected every pause, every glance, every shift in tone. Was it a clash? A misunderstanding? Or a turning point? By the next morning, clips of Kim saying, "Brand doesn't replace effort," had millions of views. Supporters flooded her social media with messages of empowerment. Critics doubled down. The divide grew sharper. But through it all, one thing was clear. Kim Kardashian had stepped into that studio prepared to protect her narrative. And she did. Now we want to hear from you. Did Jimmy push too far, or was Kim right to stand her ground? Was this a heated clash, or a powerful moment of self-assertion? Drop your opinion in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if you love deep, dramatic breakdowns of Hollywood's most explosive moments, make sure you subscribe to Talk Flair, like this video, and turn on notifications. Because the next story? It might be even more shocking. The applause from the first segment hadn't fully faded before the producers were already scrambling behind the curtain. What had started as playful late-night banter had turned into something far more combustible. The tension lingered in the air like static before a storm. When the show returned from commercial break, the band struck up a lighter tune, almost forced, almost too cheerful. Jimmy Fallon adjusted his jacket, flashed a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, and turned back toward Kim Kardashian. "All right," Jimmy said, clapping his hands together softly. "We're back with Kim Kardashian, everybody." The audience cheered, but it wasn't the same carefree roar from earlier. It was cautious now, curious, waiting. Kim sat poised, legs crossed, fingers interlocked neatly on her knee. Calm on the surface, calculated, but her eyes were sharper now, more alert. She knew the energy had shifted, and she wasn't going to let herself be reduced to a soundbite. Jimmy leaned forward. "So, let's talk about the evolution. From keeping up with the Kardashians to where you are now. That's a massive leap." Kim nodded slowly. "It's not a leap. It's a climb." That line hit. Jimmy blinked. "A climb? Yes," she said firmly. "A leap suggests I jumped from one thing to another effortlessly. That's not what happened. I worked for this." A murmur of approval swept through the crowd. Jimmy attempted a softer tone. "You've had some incredible moments lately, balancing motherhood, business, acting." Kim's expression warmed slightly at the mention of her children. "My kids are my grounding force," she said. "No matter what happens in Hollywood, when I go home, I'm just mom." The audience softened. She continued, her voice steady but layered with emotion. "Becoming a mother changed everything for me. It shifted my priorities. It made me think about legacy, not just fame." Jimmy nodded. "Legacy is big." "It is," Kim replied. "And legacy isn't built on viral clips. It's built on impact." There it was again, that subtle reminder. Jimmy shifted in his chair. "Impact like your work in criminal justice reform?" Kim's eyes lit with a different kind of fire. "Exactly. Sitting in rooms with lawmakers. Studying case files until 3 a.m. Helping families who've lost hope. That's real." The audience erupted in applause, this time more genuine, less tentative. But Jimmy, perhaps feeling the need to reclaim his signature comedic rhythm, leaned back and said with a grin, You've got to admit, though, the internet still loves to meme you. A few nervous laughs echoed. Kim inhaled slowly. The internet loves a version of me that's easy to digest. Jimmy raised an eyebrow. And what's the harder version? The one that doesn't fit the joke. Silence. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath. Jimmy's smile faded again. Do you think we're, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, part of that problem? Kim didn't answer immediately. The pause stretched long enough to make the audience squirm. I think, she said finally, late night shows shape perception more than they realize. That landed like a thunderclap. The band members exchanged glances. Producers near the stage froze. Jimmy straightened. So you think I'm shaping perception? I think, Kim replied calmly, that every platform does, including yours. The audience gasped, louder this time. Jimmy let out a small exhale, almost a laugh of disbelief. Wow! But instead of deflecting, he leaned into it. That's fair. But isn't being a public figure about accepting that you don't control every narrative? Kim tilted her head. I don't control every narrative, but I do control how I respond to it. Applause thundered. The energy was no longer awkward. It was electric. Jimmy pivoted. Let's talk acting. Your performance in American Horror Story surprised a lot of people. Kim smiled faintly. I know. You went dark, Jimmy said. Really dark. I wanted to prove I could. And did you feel the pressure? He asked. Every second, she admitted. I knew critics were waiting to tear it apart. But I trained. I rehearsed. I respected the craft. Jimmy studied her for a moment. Do you think Hollywood respects you now? Kim's jaw tightened slightly. I think they're watching, she said carefully. And that's enough. The audience leaned forward, hanging on every word. She began describing the long hours on set. The vulnerability of stepping into a dramatic role after years of being labeled just a reality star. The quiet moments in her trailer where doubt crept in. There were nights I questioned everything, she confessed. But quitting would have confirmed what they expected. Jimmy's voice softened. And you didn't quit. No, she said. I evolved. There was that word again. Jimmy smiled faintly. Evolution seems to be the theme tonight. Kim met his gaze. Evolution isn't comfortable. The tension between them had shifted from confrontation to confrontation with purpose. They weren't sparring for dominance anymore. They were navigating a deeper conversation about perception, power, and public identity. Jimmy cleared his throat. You've also got this new comedy film coming, The Fifth Wheel. That's a different energy. Kim nodded. Comedy is harder than people think. Timing. Vulnerability. You can't fake it. Jimmy grinned. Oh, I know. The audience laughed lightly, breaking the intensity for a brief second. But then Jimmy asked a question that reignited the spark. Do you ever feel like you're trying to outrun your past? The room froze. Kim's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with resolve. I'm not outrunning anything, she said slowly. I'm building forward. A wave of applause rolled through the studio. Jimmy held up his hand slightly. I respect that. But, Kim added, leaning in just a fraction, I won't let anyone reduce my future to my past. The audience stood, some clapping, some whispering, all stunned. The cameras captured Jimmy's thoughtful expression. For once, the quick-witted host was quiet. Backstage, assistants whispered urgently. Social media notifications were exploding. The clip of Kim challenging late-night platforms was already trending. Jimmy took a breath. I think this might be the most serious interview we've had in a while. Kim allowed a small smile. Maybe it needed to be. The crowd applauded again, this time not out of shock, but respect. As the segment edged toward its close, Jimmy extended a hand across the space between their chairs. No hard feelings? He asked, half smiling. Kim looked at his hand, then back at him. Just real ones, she replied. The audience gasped one last time before erupting into applause. The music swelled as the cameras pulled back, but the atmosphere was different now. Charged. Unforgettable. What had started as playful teasing had evolved into a televised reckoning about fame, respect, and reinvention. And as the credits rolled, one thing was certain. This clash was far from over. The cameras had stopped rolling, but the energy inside the studio refused to settle. Assistants moved quickly across the stage, whispering into headsets. The audience, still seated, buzzed with low murmurs. No one rushed for the exits. They all felt it. Something had happened. Not a meltdown. Not a scandal. Something sharper. Backstage, Kim Kardashian stood in front of a full-length mirror, her reflection steady, controlled. But beneath the composure, adrenaline still pulsed. Her publicist leaned in close. "That clip is already everywhere," she whispered. "You're trending." Kim didn't smile. "Of course I am." Across the hall, Jimmy Fallon sat in his dressing room, jacket tossed aside, replaying the conversation in his head. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. But he was unsettled. "Did I push too hard?" he muttered to a producer. "You asked what people think," the producer replied carefully. She answered. Back in the hallway, the two paths crossed unexpectedly. For a moment, there was silence. Jimmy offered a cautious smile. "Hey." Kim's expression was unreadable. "Hey." He gestured vaguely toward the studio. That got intense. Kim folded her arms, not defensive, just grounded. It got honest. Jimmy nodded slowly. "I wasn't trying to corner you." "I know," she said. "But sometimes those internet questions hit differently when you've spent years trying to move past them." There was no audience now. No applause to soften words. Just two public figures navigating the aftermath in real time. Jimmy exhaled. "You've built something massive. Businesses. Influence. Acting roles. That doesn't disappear because someone makes a joke." Kim's gaze softened just slightly. "It doesn't disappear. But it gets minimized." The hallway lights hummed faintly overhead. Jimmy leaned against the wall. Late night is built on teasing. It's how we keep things light. And I've been the light punchline for a long time, Kim replied quietly. That sentence lingered between them. Jimmy looked down for a moment. "That wasn't my intention." "I know," she repeated. "But intention doesn't erase impact." There it was again, her calm precision. The tension wasn't explosive now. It was reflective. Two professionals confronting a cultural shift happening in real time. Meanwhile, online, the conversation had exploded. Clips from The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon were circulating at lightning speed. Commentators debated whether Kim had overreacted or finally asserted herself. Think pieces began forming within hours. Was this the moment Kim Kardashian officially stepped beyond her old narrative? By midnight, hashtags tied to her acting work in American Horror Story were trending again. Viewers revisited her performance, analyzing scenes with new seriousness. Critics who once doubted her range were suddenly reconsidering. Back in her car, leaving the studio, Kim stared out the window at the city lights of New York. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from friends, from family, from industry executives. One text stood out from her mother. "Proud of you for standing your ground." Kim allowed herself a small exhale. Her life had been defined by moments under a microscope. From the early days of keeping up with the Kardashians to launching billion-dollar brands, every move dissected, debated, judged. But tonight felt different. Tonight wasn't about glamour. It wasn't about fashion. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about respect. The next morning, headlines splashed across entertainment sites. Kim Kardashian claps back at Fallon. Late night tension shocks audience. Is Kim done playing nice? Morning shows replayed the clip where she said, "Brand doesn't replace effort." That line became a rallying cry. Entrepreneurs quoted it. Influencers reposted it. Even aspiring actors shared it as motivation. And then came the industry reaction. An executive from her upcoming film, The Fifth Wheel, released a statement praising her professionalism and commitment to craft. Subtle, strategic, supportive. By afternoon, paparazzi swarmed outside her office. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "Kim, was it staged? Are you upset with Jimmy? Was that a real argument?" She paused briefly before entering the building. "It was a real conversation," she said simply. Inside, her team gathered around a conference table. Clips played on a large screen. Analytics numbers climbed in real time. Her publicist looked up. "This changes your positioning." Kim raised an eyebrow. "How?" "You're not just the mogul. Not just the influencer. You're becoming formidable." Formidable. The word echoed. Later that evening, Jimmy addressed the moment subtly in his monologue. "Sometimes interviews go deeper than planned," he admitted with a half smile. "And that's okay. Real conversations matter." The audience applauded, but there was humility in his tone now. Back at home, Kim sat with her kids, the chaos of the day momentarily fading. One of them looked up at her. "Mom, were you on TV today?" She smiled softly. "Yeah. Did you win?" She paused. "It wasn't about winning," she said gently. "It was about being heard." And that perhaps was the real shift. Because for years, Kim Kardashian had been seen. Photographed. Filmed. streamed. But being heard? That was different. By the end of the week, public opinion had fractured into camps. Some argued that late-night comedy should remain irreverent. Others insisted it was time to retire the tired narratives around women who evolve beyond their origins. Industry insiders whispered that Hollywood had taken note. Casting directors who once hesitated were watching the response carefully. Executives saw engagement numbers skyrocket. The clash had unintentionally amplified her credibility. And somewhere in that swirl of headlines and hashtags, a new chapter quietly began forming. Not one defined by scandal, not one fueled by spectacle, but one sharpened by confrontation and strengthened by composure. The question wasn't whether Kim Kardashian could survive a heated live TV exchange. The question now was, had that clash just elevated her into a different league entirely? Because sometimes the most powerful transformation doesn't happen in a carefully curated photo shoot or a scripted reality episode. Sometimes it happens in the uncomfortable silence after a joke doesn't land. And sometimes evolution arrives wearing the face of conflict. By the end of the week, what happened on that stage wasn't just a viral clip anymore. It had become a cultural flashpoint. News panels replayed the moment in slow motion. The pause before Kim answered. The shift in Jimmy's posture. The audience gasped. Analysts dissected it frame by frame like it was a championship game-winning shot. But this wasn't sports. This was reputation, identity, power. Inside conference rooms across Los Angeles, executives were watching closely. Streaming platforms quietly monitored the spike in searches for Kim Kardashian. Views for her scenes in American Horror Story surged overnight. Clips from Keeping Up with the Kardashians resurfaced, not as mockery this time, but as origin story. And the upcoming film The Fifth Wheel? Industry insiders whispered that early promotional numbers had doubled in just 72 hours. What was meant to be a tense late-night exchange had turned into strategic momentum. But the real storm was happening online. One side called it a masterclass in composure. Another accused her of being overly defensive. Influencers filmed reaction videos with titles like "Kim finally snaps" and "Jimmy went too far." Meanwhile, Jimmy Fallon faced his own wave of scrutiny. Commentators debated whether late-night formats needed to evolve. Was teasing still harmless in an era hyper-aware of narrative control? Or had audiences grown tired of recycling the same jokes about women who refused to stay in the boxes they started in? 2 nights later, Jimmy addressed it more directly on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. He stood center stage, hands clasped. "You know," he began, "sometimes a conversation reminds you that growth isn't just for guests. It's for hosts too." The audience applauded softly. He didn't apologize. He didn't dramatize. But the tone was different, measured, reflective. Across the country, Kim watched the clip in her living room. Her team had gathered again, phones lighting up the room with notifications. But this time, there was no tension in her posture. Just quiet assessment. Her publicist leaned over. He handled that well. Kim nodded once. "It's not about him versus me." "Then what is it about?" She looked toward the window, where city lights flickered in the distance. "It's about narrative ownership." And that phrase became the undercurrent of everything that followed. Within days, major magazines requested cover interviews. Not about fashion, not about relationships, about reinvention, about resilience, about longevity. One journalist asked her, "Was that moment planned?" She smiled faintly. "No, but it was necessary." The aftermath wasn't explosive. It was transformative. Casting rumors intensified. Executives who once hesitated now leaned forward. If she could command a live audience under pressure, could she anchor more complex roles? Could she carry dramatic weight beyond expectation? Her legal advocacy work also saw renewed attention. Donations to reform initiatives she supported spiked. Families she had quietly helped began sharing their gratitude publicly, reframing her public image in a more grounded light. But perhaps the most powerful shift happened in the audience itself. Women on social media began sharing their own late-night moments, times when they were reduced to stereotypes in professional settings. Entrepreneurs quoted her line, "Brand doesn't replace effort," in boardrooms and brainstorming sessions. The clash had transcended celebrity. And yet, beneath the headlines and hashtags, there was still something deeply human about it. One evening, weeks later, Jimmy and Kim crossed paths again at an industry event. No cameras broadcasting live tension this time. Just photographers flashing bulbs as they walked the red carpet. They stopped, locked eyes, smiled. Jimmy leaned in slightly. Still evolving? Kim's smile held steady. Always. The photographers captured that exchange, but this time there was no gasp. No viral freeze frame of conflict. Just mutual acknowledgement. Growth. Because sometimes heated clashes aren't about destruction. They're about recalibration. The public had expected a meltdown. Instead, they witnessed a negotiation of power in real time. A woman refusing to let humor dilute her effort. A host recognizing the weight of his platform. And in the weeks that followed, something subtle but undeniable shifted in Hollywood's atmosphere. Kim wasn't just invited to shows anymore. She was approached differently. Questioned differently. Framed differently. The narrative had cracked. And once a narrative cracks, it never seals the same way again. Now here's where you come in. Was that moment on live TV a clash, or a catalyst? Did Jimmy cross a line, or did Kim simply decide she wasn't laughing along anymore? Do you think this changed how Hollywood sees her, or how we see her? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Let's have the real conversation. And if you want more explosive, cinematic deep dives into the moments that redefine celebrity culture, make sure you subscribe to Talk Flair, like this video, and turn on notifications, because the next story might already be unfolding under the spotlight.